apologize for being late. I was at a industry meeting for the Sacramento folks. Who's gonna be presenting the program? Step up to the well there, brother.
You ready for me to go?
We're ready. Welcome.
All right, thank you. Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Clay Whitehead. I'm a 25-year-plus employee of Motorola Communications, and I want to thank you folks for this most appropriate day to present on statewide radio communications. I have for you today a very vendor-agnostic presentation. This is not a Motorola sales pitch. We've removed all the branding and everything. We're presenting to you information. If you have any questions along the way, please don't hesitate to ask. If you would like an electronic copy of the presentation you have before you, we'll be happy to oblige on that as well. So what we want to talk about today as part of our agenda are some of the challenges that public safety, especially at the state level, faces in Georgia today. Take a look at the landscape of statewide communications across the U.S. We'll talk briefly about FirstNet, just to make sure everybody has a firm understanding of what FirstNet is and the services that it would provide and when it would be available. We'll talk about radio coverage for statewide systems and why that is critical, how you might implement a statewide radio system, and we'll talk about the existing footprint of investment in radio technology today at the local level that the state could look to in terms of partnerships with the local governments, and then some additional considerations as we wrap up at the end. So some of the most prevalent communications challenges that your state agencies face today are they all operate in individual silos. Okay? Just about every agency has their own radio system. So think about if every agency had their own computer system, and if you wanted to email somebody in another agency and those computer systems weren't connected, you had to go to another agency's building to send an email. That's basically how your radio communication systems are set up today. They are islands unto each other. So most of your agencies today also operate with radio in a spectrum band that is prone to interference and heavy congestion. It's called the VHF frequency band. Radios in public safety will operate in VHF, UHF, 700 megahertz, and 800 megahertz. VHF is part of the older spectrum initially established by the FCC many decades ago, and it has a lot of problems associated with it. Most of your state agencies operate in that spectrum today. You also see challenges from public safety personnel because these systems and their tower sites are disconnected as they move across geography. Say, for example, a GBI officer that's involved in a joint task force is going from one location to another across multiple counties. That officer has to dial in or change the mode, the channel on his or her radio as they move to each tower site. Unlike cellular communications, which handles that handoff for you automatically. Imagine if you had to dial into each cellular tower as you move throughout a county down the interstate. Okay? That's another challenge that your public safety officers have to face. And then perhaps the most important one is the radio coverage itself off of each of these systems has many dead spots, areas where there are no radio communication. So an officer pulls someone over on a state highway, gets out of his or her vehicle, uses a handheld device to try to communicate back to dispatch to do a tag check or some other form of communications, but is not able to reach the network because they can't communicate where there are areas of dead spots. So these are everyday challenges your officers and personnel face on a daily basis. Now here's an example of the number of radio systems that the state has today. Every one of these agencies represented here has a separate standalone radio system. They are not connected together. They cannot communicate directly without going through some type of manual intervention that's required to communicate across agency lines. Now, we also added some local government agencies up here as well, just to demonstrate that not only is there challenge between state agencies, but also in the ability to communicate with the local government agencies. So, what are some of the benefits of a statewide communications network for your public safety officers? One of the primary benefits of such a network is that by consolidating onto one seamless network for everybody, instead of paying for and funding the ongoing maintenance and operation of multiple networks, you're reducing the burden on the taxpayer. You're providing a better service to each of your public safety officers and to the citizens that they serve, but you're also, by consolidating, just like any other type of IT technology, you can reduce the taxpayer burden across all levels of government, from local up through state, and even if you decided to partner with federal agencies in a situation like this. You improve or remove, rather, the impediments to interoperability. So today you have many barriers to interoperability across agency lines because you're not connected together. You may have antiquated equipment. You may not have coverage. So a comprehensive, consolidated statewide communications system addresses all that and provides the ability for any officer operating on that network to operate and communicate to any other officer wherever they are within the geography of the state of Georgia. Another critical benefit is officer safety, right? Think about a state patrol officer, a corrections officer. These are people that put their life on the line every day. They may be going into a situation they don't expect to be dangerous at any one point in time, but at any second that could change dramatically. So an officer not only needs reliable radio communications, but these consolidated networks today also provide many officer safety features, like the ability to track the vehicle that officer drives in, as well as the handheld units that those officers use. So with a technology that provides consolidated communication services across the state, an officer can leave his or her vehicle when they pull someone over on the side of the highway, and if that person decides to run off into the woods because their warrant's out on that individual, the officer leaves his or her vehicle, you can track that individual officer and know where they are. There's also an emergency button on radio systems that allow that officer, if he or she can't talk on the radio at that point in time, if they can just get to the button on the top of the radio and depress that, then dispatch and other officers in the vicinity would know that they have pressed their emergency button. They get a visible and audible alert, and they would know the location of that individual, be able to dispatch backup and further assistance to help that person. Statewide communications also enable more efficiency in response and recovery, and they are always designed to be high availability networks to provide the level of service that's required for public safety operation. Now, we recognize that commercial networks provide many highly valuable and highly reliable services, but a statewide communication system built for public safety provides more levels of redundancy and reliability in the overall network design. And then the last thing I want to touch on, and I'm going to go into this in the next slide, is planning for the future integration with FirstNet. Right? That's a critical element of radio system investment today. Before I talk about FirstNet, I want to talk about the current landscape of statewide systems in the U.S. today. There are 42 states represented in blue that have statewide communications systems today. Those in gray do not have statewide communications. Now let me elaborate a little bit on that. Okay, the ones in blue, when I say statewide, it's a consolidated, IT infrastructure that has support for multiple agencies on one seamless network. Okay? And it provides many of those robust features and levels of redundancy that I referred to in the past. Georgia is one of the gray states. Georgia State Patrol, GBI, they have statewide communications radio capability, but they're disconnected, right? They are not seamless, and they require significant manual intervention by the users to be able to establish a communications path. So they're not consolidated networks, they're separate silos like what we saw earlier. A lot of those systems that you saw that were highlighted in blue are also built on the current standard for public safety radio technology called P25. This is a standard that's been around for a couple of decades. The main benefit of this standard is that it provides direct interoperability across the network regardless of the vendor of manufacture of the equipment. And that in and of itself creates competition between the vendors in a technology procurement scenario. Right? So it ensures interoperable communications regardless of the vendor, regardless of the end user devices, as long as it's built to the Project 25 standard. Now, not here today to suggest the state needs to buy a P25 system, but to give you the information that the majority of those statewide systems today are built on Project 25 technology from multiple vendors, and many of those systems are being implemented also with a future path to FirstNet. So FirstNet is planned to be a nationwide high bandwidth network, mobile broadband, available to public safety operation, right? It will look very much like a cellular network, like a Verizon or an AT&T or any other commercial network out there, but the spectrum is allocated specifically for public safety operation. And its initial rollout for many years, it will provide mobile data services. It will also support voice capability, but in its initial rollout, it will primarily it will not support a P25 designed voice function, something that emulates two-way radio today, because there are many unique features and performance characteristics associated with what a two-way radio does versus what one of these cellular type handsets does. And I won't elaborate on that and go into that rabbit hole, but FirstNet today, if you go to their website, and when they hold these forums and these work groups with states and local government operation to bring them up to date on where FirstNet is going, they specifically say you need to continue to operate your land mobile radio systems for many years to come, because the technology, while it will support broadband communications, it's not where it needs to be to provide the same level of service that traditional two-way radio push-to-talk provides in our public safety community today. So for coverage for a statewide radio system, I selected, here's 2 state radio maps. These are 2 agencies that I've worked with for a couple of years, so I selected them because I'm very familiar with how these systems were implemented, if there were any additional questions about that. But you can see from the maps, the green area represents the area of where coverage is available. It meets the minimum coverage requirement for an officer to hit his or her push-to-talk button on the radio and be able to communicate to other officers or to dispatch. Right? And you can see the red dots on the screen represent where the tower sites are. All right? So you have pretty much blanket coverage throughout a state, as you would expect for public safety, minimum level of availability for coverage service across a network. And when you talk about how would you implement a statewide communication system, if you have nothing in place today, or if you have local government systems that have invested in currently available radio system technologies. How could you leverage that? There are a lot of things to consider. One would be the geography. How would I want to roll it out in terms of geography? Would I focus on the coastal areas first and then move northward from there? Just as an example, that's how Mississippi implemented their system. They built a system along the coast, then they moved to the middle part of the state, and then they moved to the final part up in the north. So they implemented theirs in 3 phases. You could build an entire statewide system all the way across the state before you ever cut your first public safety user over. So geography is obviously a critical part. Where are the priority areas to provide service first? Population is another critical part as well. Do we focus on areas of high population concentration to get the most bang for our buck? Or do we look at population in terms of the number of users? Where are most of the users that would use this system located? That's another area to consider. Obviously, critical infrastructure and our natural resources in Georgia are things we want to consider as well. If there are areas like our transportation corridors, Georgia probably has, the transportation corridors in Georgia are probably as important or more important in this state than maybe anywhere else in the country, because you think about the ports in Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida moving goods through the interstates that pass through this state. Those corridors are absolutely critical to service not just the citizens and the people of Georgia, but other parts of the Southeast and the U.S. as well. The energy facilities that are here in the state of Georgia, obviously critical infrastructure. But you could think of government buildings, university campuses, business districts. You could think of our natural resources like our parks, our forest land, our mountain areas. Think about the forest fires that we had last year and the devastation that that created and the challenges that that created to the public safety people that were trying to respond to and restore and recover from the devastation that that created. So those are some of the other areas you would want to think about in terms of what's the priority for us if we choose to implement a statewide system. And then the final part is, who are the agencies and partners that we would consider as part of our implementation? The obvious ones, State Patrol, Department of Natural Resources, Corrections, those state agencies. What about the National Guard? What about FEMA? If we need to be prepared to support joint response with FEMA if we had another hurricane far worse than what Hurricane Matthew did in the state of Georgia. What about local governments? Local governments already have, as you'll see, a large investment in two-way radio technology that could be leveraged in a consolidated network across the state. So here's a view of that right here. Now, the state of Georgia is in a unique position in terms of how some other states came to implement their statewide systems. Mississippi, for example, and I keep referring back to that one because I know a lot about how that system came to be. Mississippi had nothing. They had no local government systems other than a hodgepodge of radio communications. So they got a lot of FEMA dollars, obviously, after Hurricane Katrina and some of the other hurricanes that came through. They built a system from the ground up. What you see in green on this map are all the local government systems. Most of them, the regional networks were funded by state homeland security grants that were addressed, processed, and approved through the state of Georgia here. So the folks that had the foresight to do that really did the state a great service, because those networks could be connected together and be part of the baseline for building out a statewide system and not having to put up new tower sites and assets in the areas that are already green. Now, obviously, we can't speak for those local government agencies whether they choose or choose not to partner, but there are certainly advantages on both sides for the local government and for the state to bring those local government agencies and these regional networks and tie them together as a base for building out the rest of the state in a statewide communication system. And you can see they all like their names and their acronyms for their regional communication systems. But there are also a number of other standalone systems throughout the state. I've only labeled on the map here the regional networks. So those are regional partnerships, multiple governments that share a common communication system. On this slide, you can see every county and municipality that has a P25 system in the state of Georgia. And you can see where there's the indention under one particular name. Those are all the counties or municipalities are a part of that regional system. I believe these systems, as you see them today, represents around a third of the geography and about 75% of the population with those systems that are covered today. So, in wrapping up, I just want to finish with some additional considerations to think about. Reach out to some other states. If this is a path you want to choose to move toward, statewide communications, I highly recommend you talk to some other states, your colleagues in other states, people that were involved in funding, in procurement, in the decision-making process. Find out what they did. What were they able to leverage? What was their business model, for example? South Carolina, for example, has an outsourced system, as we refer to it. They don't own the system. It's owned by a vendor. The South Carolina agencies pay for airtime. They buy their own radios. They pay for airtime. So they did not invest a single dime in the infrastructure. Other states do an in-source model. They procure their own assets, their own tower sites, their own radio equipment, and they own it. Maybe they pay an outside vendor to maintain the system for it. So there are several variables in the business model that you can consider as well. And some final considerations. Obviously, like any technology procurement, you want to consider what are the total life cycle costs. There's obviously a capital outlay up front. There are end user requirements and accessories that would need to be procured. And then there's the ongoing operational cost of that system. What are the life cycle costs? How long will I operate this before I decide we need to do either a technology refresh or look at FirstNet down the road when it becomes available? Funding sources, right? What are the revenue areas that I can look at, right? Obviously, budget allocations, but a big question that agencies look at is, am I going to charge user fees for local government agencies to participate? We'll fund it for state agencies. We'll charge local user governments a user fee to be on the system, right? Again, something that needs to be considered, worked out as part of your potential revenue sources. Governance has a big play. The more agencies you bring to the table, right, the more opportunity for funding you have, the more opportunity for leveraging existing assets, whether it's tower sites, backhaul, dispatch centers, existing radio equipment that can be integrated into a new network. But all of those potential partners will expect to have a seat at the table as part of the governance of the system. Right? If I'm going to participate, I want some level of participation in determining where we're going to go on this. That's a huge element to consider. If you're going to have local governments involved, if federal agencies are going to be involved, if you decide to let utilities participate on this to share the cost, they would expect to have participation in the governance. And then the procurement. Obviously, you want a technology and a solution that allows you to have a competitive procurement. But obviously, you also want to look at how did other states choose to do their procurement? Did they do an RFP? Did they do an invitation to negotiate? What worked for other states and why? Some additional questions to consider. So, to wrap up, just a couple of summary recommendations based on what we've already discussed today. Talk to other states. Many states in the Southeast have statewide systems, but you saw there were 42 states have statewide systems. If you have colleagues in other states that were involved in the procurement or the implementation, highly recommend you talk to some of those folks, listen to some of their lessons learned. Obviously, you need a champion or champions within the state. You need folks that are willing to drive the project and make it happen. And you want to establish inclusiveness in your governance model. That will allow you to attract more local government partners, more partners outside of your state government. You want to fully define your functional and performance requirements so that the system provides the level of service that your end user agencies need. Last thing you want to do is implement something that provides no better coverage, no better audio clarity than what you have in place today, right? And you want that solution to include a bridge to FirstNet. And the technologies in place today can provide that bridge to FirstNet for you. Those technologies can integrate with FirstNet. As I mentioned earlier, FirstNet is built on cellular 4G technology. It will be 5G when that becomes available. Those technologies for two-way communications today can and are integrating with cellular-based 4G technology already. So there is a path in place today. And then you want to obviously define your procurement process to allow a competitive procurement, a healthy competitive procurement process. So, are there any questions, comments?
All right, let's just start at number 19.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. And thank you for the presentation. My question is, traditionally, the radios that I've seen are somewhere between 4 and 8 channels, I guess. Is there, will there, if Jay and I, or he's one agency, I'm another agency, will I be able to hear his chatter all day long?
If you want to, yes. If you don't want to, no. So the radios can be configured. The radios can actually come with up to 1,000 channels in them today if you want one with 1,000 channels. Now, I think personally the people that want 1,000 channels in their radio are crazy. You would want to have the ability to talk to people you talk to on a daily basis, and that's going to be your primary channel that you're on. But if you needed to talk to someone in another agency, you would have another slot channel that you select on the radio you go to on an as-needed basis. And then you could go back to your primary channel when you're done. And you could even have what we refer to as scan. So if you're familiar with scan, it means I can monitor other channels while I'm listening to my primary everyday channel. And if it detects voice on one of those other channels, and I want the radio to do that, it will put me over on that other channel. But you have the flexibility to determine how you want that to work.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. My first part of my question is, have you polled all the other agencies to see if this is something that they want to do? Because radio transmissions, GBI may want to communicate with the State Patrol, but they may not want to communicate with DNR or GDOT or someone of that nature. And so that becomes an issue of their operations communications being shared without really meaning to share that information. So how do you address that? So
anytime, and I'm speaking as a Motorolan here, anytime we would do a radio system implementation, we would go out and we would talk to each individual agency and do a thorough survey and interview to determine how they want their radios to operate. So it would be presumptive of us today to try and go out to do that, because you haven't even decided whether you're going to go down this road or not. But if you decide to go and do a competitive procurement for a statewide system, part of the scope that you would require your selected vendor to do is to perform those tasks in addition to many others that you just mentioned.
so they could decide which departments they wanted to interact with in regards to communication transmission.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Mr. Lunson.
Thank you for this presentation. I had the oversight for implementing a system in Rome and Floyd County some years ago with an 800 megahertz system, P25 compatible. One of the challenges that we faced was, of course, funding such a system.
Yes.
And in our particular area, because we're in the foothills, we had to build out a number of tower sites. And we're talking about a $25 million project for to implement that, but a large portion of that cost came as a result of having to build out tower sites.
Yes, sir.
When you're talking about a statewide implementation of this, how many tower sites do you anticipate that it might be necessary to have? Certainly in South Georgia, flatter terrain, you don't have the problems that you do in the mountainous areas of the state. But this is, trying to figure out ways to implement that. Back in 2010, 2011, the state's participation at that point was not, we weren't there. So
Sure.
This is something I see benefit for, but I know we're looking at a pretty significant cost just to put the towers in place.
Absolutely. Tower sites are probably your biggest single cost in a system because of the amount of concrete and steel that's required if you have to erect a new tower. So bear with me here. I'm going to try not to go down in the weeds on this, but because I used to be an engineer and I, by habit, will do that. So I'm going to try to avoid talking about
Please.
DBs and stuff like that. But so I'm familiar with the Rome-Floyd system from when that system was procured. For a county where you're going to have firefighters and EMTs and folks going inside of buildings on a daily basis, your specific county system was designed for your county users. State patrol officers, DNR personnel in an area like a Rome-Floyd County or Macon-Bibb or Augusta-Richmond, any place like that, aren't going to need the same level of coverage. They're going to need good coverage for their vehicle and when they get out of their vehicle. When a DNR officer is going down in the woods to check fishing license for somebody, things like that. So the statewide system probably isn't going to need as many towers in a county as that specific county and its agencies require. But if you back it up and you look at just state agencies, what they need across the state, I remember back in 1995, the state put out a bid for a statewide system, and the coverage analysis at that time dictated 176 tower sites. Now, many of those were existing tower sites, some the state owned, some were local county government owned, some were leased tower sites, and yes, there were some that would have had to have been built from the ground up. So I would say if there's an appetite for those local government agencies that we saw on the map that built their systems with Homeland Security dollars that cover about a third of the geography, if you could get even 4 or maybe 5 of those to partner with you and not have to build in those counties and look at other local governments, you're probably looking somewhere around 80 to 100 additional towers not covered by those systems, but there are, of those 80 to 100, you probably wouldn't have to build all of those either. I'm going to say maybe half of those. And then you could look at partnering with other local governments that don't decide to share their systems with the state. They have existing assets in place. That every county has towers. And then there are also leased tower site providers as well. I think probably 50 towers, somewhere around there is a good round. Off the top of my head, that's probably the best I could
We
do.
had 2. We had to build out 6. Thus,
Okay.
the cost. So they're just pricey to put in place.
Yes, they can be, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Other questions?
25. Who's number 21?
Caught me by surprise there. Well, I've been involved in this now for almost 50 years, and I've seen the system that we have in place across the state greatly improve, and I've always wished that we could facilitate the funding for a complete statewide system. We tried very hard prior to the Olympics. You talk about 1995, and that was we actually ended up renting a system here in Atlanta to deal with that. And I thought we were going to keep it, but after the Olympics was over, we actually sold it to a local agency. And as I was watching there, I was the Homeland Security Director for a couple of years, and we put in all the communication systems along the coast for the G8 when that occurred. Dan Brown right here was working for me then, and I've never understood the architecture for all these, but you know, I've been in law enforcement business for a long time, and I adopt very, very readily to the changes from the operational perspective. And I just think, as I understand it now, this is probably the best cost analysis we have for doing this. Technology changes all the time, and you know, you always, I hate to buy a phone, and then next year they tell me the thing needs to be upgraded or I need to get a new one because it's obsolete. But what do you foresee here if we invest in this type of a system now? And I don't grasp, you know, I've been in 100 of these meetings and I don't grasp all the things that you talk about in the internal workings, but I certainly understand it from the business end of things and how they work and how valuable they can be. And the one question I had, the emergency button was talked about previously, but will that follow with a handheld, or is that just going to be in the vehicle where you have to get back in your car? If you get into a fight or have a problem, do you have to get back in the car and hit that button, or can you put it on the handheld where you run into the woods or you're laying alongside the road, you can hit it?
That's both, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll work on the handheld. You can put it on the lapel microphone as well, or down here on the hip.
Well, I congratulate you for persistence. I know this has been about a 30-year ordeal, and you know, I've always hoped that one day we would see it come to fruition, and I think they addressed some of my questions down the other end, but that's, you know, the last radio I had before I retired allowed me to have access to a great number of channels. However, I only monitored certain ones, but I traveled the whole state, and I could move it around so that I could listen as I moved in. Is this a similar system? You say manual intervention. I could manually change it on the radio so that I could listen to what I wanted to. But I just can't imagine with all the public safety and local governments and, you know, the ports. I represent the ports. The ports are in my area. I just can't imagine that everybody could be on there and that you could actually hear transmissions without some kind of independent ability to manually change them.
So you can set it up however you want to. The system will handle a individual user roaming across multiple sites. Each site can have multiple channels and automatically assign you to a channel as you roam from one site to another. And it will automatically establish connection between a user hitting his or her push-to-talk button to all the other users in the group they need to communicate with. So, for example, think about a State Patrol officer in Troop C driving around the perimeter, wants to be able to talk to every other State Patrol officer, or at least be heard by every other State Patrol officer, including his command supervisor, whenever he or she gets out of a vehicle to pull somebody over. They're vulnerable at that time, obviously, when they're out of the vehicle. And they want to make sure their communications is heard loud and clearly. If they get into trouble, he or she hits their emergency button, gets knocked down, gets in a tussle, gets shot at, whatever the case may be. That audio is automatically directed to all the other people that are supposed to be monitoring. And that's a key part of how your technical people would decide how you want the system set up and to operate, is where that audio goes to.
See, that's kind of in place, at least it was when I retired. You had the ability. The only problem was if you got probably more than a couple hundred yards or a quarter mile away from the vehicle, then you didn't have, because it transmitted back through the vehicle. I don't know whether the new system facilitates that a little more efficiently, but I'm all for it. You know, as your people have talked to me, I've just questioned them pretty hard about the financial concerns, because that's been the detriment of this process for the last 30 or 40 years. And
Understood.
but I appreciate you continuing to try.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, Mr. Collins.
Being a new kid on the block, there's not much I get excited about up here. But I was involved with the water system out in West Georgia,
Yes, sir.
and that's probably one of the greatest accomplishments that I was able to achieve working with council and working with commissioners, was that water system. I'm very proud of that. Just the flexibility it gives public safety in our area, being able to communicate with each other. And I think one of the things I'd be remiss if I didn't say this is, all these agencies coming together, being on a system, everybody needs to have their privacy and be able to share and communicate with who they want to share that information with. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but those talk groups, if the colonel wanted to have a talk group with his command staff, he could have that talk group where they could just communicate with each other.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily with that patrolman that's working the interstate down in South Georgia. So, you know, while you want to bring everybody together, you still have that flexibility to communicate with who you want to and have it encrypted. And I think that the other thing that's imperative is this FirstNet. This technology is just on the cusp of breaking, from what I understand, to be able to download information from car to car, through a system that we want to invest in. But you know, just as important to pay our public safety what they deserve, it's just as important to provide them with the resources and the tools to do that job. It's nice to get excited about being able to give them more money, but being able to offer this communication is going to be vital to all agencies, not just State Patrol and GBI. And I tell you, if nothing else gets done over the next few years for public safety, this needs to be a top priority. And one thing that we have to be committed to as a state government, the technology that's being utilized in the car, those radios could go for decades. And there was no upgrade in technology. But like any other system that you provide at home or a business, technology changes.
Yes.
And there's going to be an ongoing cost. There has to be an ongoing cost. And you have to be focused on funding that and realizing that up front. And one of the challenges I think that we're talking about is sites for towers. I think if you get right down in the trenches and look at it, every municipality, every county government has water towers and things that can be utilized if you get right down to it. And so while that cost certainly needs to be looked at, I think that the real partnership and the real success could be partnering with those local governments that already have a radio system in place and minimizing the cost. I think that everyone could share in that, and that would be very beneficial to state and local governments. And probably get some federal dollars somewhere as well to help with this. So I'm very excited about it. Look forward to what we can put together.
Couldn't agree more. Very well
I'm
said.
pretty excited my own self, but I'm so excited that in about 3 minutes, we've got a law enforcement appreciation ceremony over at the Capitol. So I think we've about had all we can say. But just right off the bat, I want to thank you for taking your time. Our senators have now came in, so you can start all over again. And if any of the members of the House Public Safety Committee didn't get enough of enough answers, y'all are welcome to stay here for the second go
All right.
round. But I want to thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you
As
for the
a footnote
hospitality.
to that, and this to the committee members, in 1998, I was chairing the Budget Committee, Public Safety Budget Committee, and we were talking about interoperability then.
Mm-hmm.
We're still talking about it today. What's the price tag up to now? $250, $350 to start?
We gave some numbers to Ms. Wigden a couple of weeks back, so I'm sure she'd be willing to share that with you. I don't have it with me today, but.
Great.
Can I recall?
Yes, sir. If anybody wants a electronic copy, if you leave me your email address, we'd be happy to get that too.
You got my friend
friend Tim Pageant out there in West Georgia.
I know Tim. Philip here knows.